August 1943, the jungles of New Georgia Island. The night was a living thing, thick, wet, and breathing. Crickets hissed in the heat, and somewhere in the blackness, the slow churn of the sea lapped against coral. Japanese soldiers crouched in the mud, gripping their Arisaka rifles, eyes straining against the pitch. They had fought in the dark before, ambushes, bayonets, whispers of death. But this night was different. From across the tree line came a sudden roar. Then, light. Streams of burning red lines tore across the jungle. The sky erupted in glowing arcs, every bullet painting a trail of fire that cut through the black. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't flares. It was the bullets themselves, glowing, streaking, chasing through the dark like vengeful comets. The Japanese infantry froze. They had never seen bullets like this, rounds that burned the air itself. Every tracer revealed their silhouettes, every burst exposed their movement. Panic rippled. For the first time in the Pacific, darkness, once their ally, turned against them. The fire traced the dark, and the Japanese commanders, watching from their posts, realized that the Americans had changed the rules of the night. When the Second World War erupted in the Pacific, the Empire of Japan held a terrifying momentum. Pearl Harbor had been more than a strike. It was a declaration that Japan would dominate the Pacific. From December 1941 through 1942, imperial forces swept across Asia with mechanical precision. Hong Kong, Malaya, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and the vast Pacific archipelagos fell one after another. The rising sun advanced through the seas like a storm without a horizon. But with each victory, Japan stretched itself thinner. Thousands of miles of sea to guard. Hundreds of islands to defend. The ocean became both empire and prison. By early 1943, that tide began to turn. The U.S. Navy, rebuilding from the devastation of Pearl Harbor, had grown stronger, leaner, faster, and deadlier. New carriers sailed from American shipyards every few months. The Marines, hardened by brutal lessons in Guadalcanal's swamps, learned to fight not as traditional infantry, but as amphibious predators. Each landing was a test of endurance. Every inch of coral and jungle earned through blood. Guadalcanal became the crucible. There, under constant rain and malarial heat, America met Japan's finest, the disciplined, fearless troops of the Imperial Army and Navy. For 6 relentless months, both sides fought not just for territory, but for psychological dominance. Control of the night was everything. The Japanese had mastered darkness. They attacked under cover of moonless skies, moving silently through the jungle, relying on bayonets and the shock of surprise. American forces, burdened with heavy equipment and limited night vision, often stood blind in the black. It was in these conditions that a quiet revolution began. One not in strategy, but in science. American engineers, analyzing field reports, noticed a pattern. Most engagements were happening in near-total darkness. Visibility was zero. Artillery spotting was guesswork. Machine gunners often fired blind, unsure if their rounds hit anything at all. Commanders needed a way to see their own fire. The answer came not from generals, but from chemists and ordnance engineers. At the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, experiments with phosphorescent compounds, chemicals that burned when ignited, led to a radical idea. Bullets that could light their own path. By embedding small amounts of magnesium and strontium salts in the bullet's base, they created ammunition that left a visible trail when fired. It was simple, elegant, and devastatingly effective. The tracer round, as it came to be called, was designed to help gunners adjust their aim during low-visibility combat. In daylight, it was a precision tool, but at night, it became something else entirely. A weapon of fear and revelation. By late 1942, U.S. units in the South Pacific began receiving limited supplies of .30 caliber and .50 caliber tracer rounds, used primarily by Browning machine guns and aircraft-mounted weapons. The first reports from Guadalcanal stunned both sides. The sky over Henderson Field lit up like a storm of meteors. American troops could now see their fire for the first time. Guiding bursts, correcting trajectories, and illuminating the jungle canopy. For pilots and anti-aircraft gunners, it transformed night combat from chaos to choreography. For the Japanese, however, it was an alien sight, terrifying and mesmerizing at once. They called them fire lines, streams of light that marked death's path. In the black Pacific nights, the tracers looked like red rain, sweeping through the darkness with surgical precision. Each streak meant an American gunner could adjust, track, and kill faster than ever before. By early 1943, Japanese commanders realized something unsettling. The Americans were no longer afraid of the dark. They had learned to see in it. And as the U.S. island-hopping campaign began, the tracer bullet would become one of the most psychologically powerful tools of the Pacific War. A glowing reminder that technology, not superstition or courage, would decide who owned the night. The Japanese High Command would soon discover that every red line in the air was more than a bullet. It was a message, a sign that the balance of the Pacific was shifting, one burning trail at a time. In the laboratories and test ranges of wartime America, the pursuit of superiority was relentless. Every failed assault in the Pacific sent a message back home. Innovation must move faster than blood can dry. The United States Army Ordnance Department began refining the new class of illuminated ammunition, bullets that didn't just pierce, but revealed. The first designs were unstable, burning too brightly or losing their glow mid-flight. But with every test, the composition improved. A tiny mixture of magnesium, strontium nitrate, and perchlorates, pressed into the bullet's base, produced a steady flame visible for nearly 800 meters. When fired, these projectiles ignited instantly, leaving behind a luminous trail that traced the bullet's exact path through the air. Engineers fine-tuned the burn rate so the light would extinguish just before impact, preventing enemy forces from tracking it back to the shooter. To the men in laboratories, it was a technical marvel. To the men in the jungle, it was the difference between blindness and survival. By mid-1943, tracer ammunition had been standardized in American logistics. Every fifth round in a machine gun belt was a tracer. A gunner didn't have to guess anymore. He could see his fire converge on a target. In aircraft, this meant that night interceptors and bomber escorts could adjust fire mid-run, painting the night with deadly precision. The result was an eerie kind of beauty. In night combat footage, the Pacific skies shimmered with arcs of red and green, the distinct colors of Allied and Axis tracer compositions. To historians, it would later resemble fireworks. To those beneath it, it was a storm of light and death. Tracer technology wasn't entirely new. Early versions had appeared during World War I, used primarily by British pilots to ignite hydrogen balloons and airships. But in the Pacific of World War II, tracers evolved from utility to psychological dominance. Japanese troops, accustomed to darkness and stealth, suddenly found their battlefield transformed. Every burst of American machine gun fire illuminated their movements. Jungle shadows no longer offered protection. Even disciplined soldiers felt exposed, hunted by light that seemed alive. Reports from captured Japanese diaries revealed genuine horror. The enemy's bullets burn as they come. The jungle glows like fireflies of death. There is no darkness left. This fear wasn't irrational. American units used tracers not just for aiming, but as psychological weapons. On several islands, Marines deliberately fired long tracer bursts across Japanese lines before an assault. creating blinding curtains of red light that shattered the illusion of concealment. Tracer ammunition also found its way into naval and aerial warfare. U.S. Navy gunners defending. Carriers and transports at night could now spot approaching aircraft, their streams of red and orange streaking toward enemy silhouettes. American pilots flying P-38 Lightnings, F-4U Corsairs, and B-25 Mitchells relied on tracers to correct strafing runs against ships, trucks, and coastal defenses. Japanese night fighters, meanwhile, had little equivalent. Their own ammunition often lacked the chemical purity and manufacturing consistency required to produce visible, stable tracer compositions. Some Imperial Navy units attempted to replicate the formula using improvised phosphor compounds, but the results were unreliable, too dim, too smoky, or prone to fouling gun barrels. By the middle of 1943, Japanese officers began to recognize a pattern. Wherever tracers appeared, defeat followed. The Americans were not merely shooting better, they were seeing better. This visual dominance created a powerful psychological inversion. The Japanese, once the masters of surprise, now found themselves illuminated, their ambushes betrayed by the very light they feared. Even veteran soldiers began referring to the tracers as the fire devils, and yet, to the Americans, these glowing bullets carried a deeper symbolism. They were proof that technology could overcome chaos, that control could be imposed even on the blind fury of night combat. In the Pacific, that control began to define victory itself. By late 1943, the tracer had become part of the U.S. military's identity, woven into every belt of ammunition, every aircraft's gun port, every Marine's memory. The war was no longer fought in total darkness. It was fought in lines of red fire, each one marking the advance of a new kind of warfare, where chemistry, courage, and light collided in the heart of the Pacific. Night. And those glowing lines would soon become far more than tactical tools. They would become emblems of an unstoppable momentum that Japan could no longer match. On the battlefield, the tracer bullet was far more than a technical curiosity. It was a language, a way for soldiers to communicate, coordinate, and survive in a chaos that few could describe. By 1943, as tracer ammunition became standard issue in American belts and drums, entire units began to rethink the way they fought. Infantry commanders no longer fired blindly into the dark. They could now direct fire like conductors guiding an orchestra of machine guns. A burst of red light across the tree line meant suppress that flank. A sweeping arc meant follow my lead. The battlefield, once a black void, became a living map drawn in streaks of light. In the Pacific jungles, visibility rarely exceeded 20 meters. Night brought near total blindness. Before tracers, soldiers relied on muzzle flashes, disorienting bursts that only showed where a gun fired, never where the rounds went. But tracers changed that instantly. A machine gunner could adjust elevation and range with each glowing streak, walking his rounds onto targets hidden behind foliage or sandbags. For gunners in foxholes and aircraft turrets alike, tracers transformed instinct into precision. They turned firepower into feedback. Marines described it as painting death. One sergeant on Bougainville wrote that it felt like pulling a red string through the jungle. When his gun jammed, he said, the darkness felt heavier, as if the light itself was gone. The tactical advantages were immense. In defense, tracers allowed smaller units to hold positions through coordinated fire lanes. Even under limited communication, Marines could visually align their fire by following another gunner's red path, adjusting, synchronizing, and concentrating bullets with terrifying accuracy. The sky above defensive perimeters often glowed red at night, a shimmering wall of light deterring Japanese infiltration. In offense, tracers became tools of rhythm, Assault units used short, pulsing bursts to guide movements. One squad would fire tracers in suppressive waves, while another advanced under the red glow. The coordination was silent, but unmistakable. It gave American infantry a strange visual unity, a shared pulse in the chaos. But what empowered one side disoriented the other. Japanese troops, whose doctrine emphasized stealth, deception, and sudden ambush, found their greatest advantage erased. Darkness had always been their ally. They trained to move silently, strike at night, and vanish before the enemy could respond. But the tracers destroyed that invisibility. Imagine a platoon advancing through jungle shadows, moving in near silence, when the first arcs of red light cut through the black. The trails revealed movement, silhouettes, even outlines of helmets. Within seconds, what was once a hidden approach turned into a spotlighted massacre. Psychologically, this inversion was devastating. Many Japanese soldiers described the sensation of being seen by the air itself. Even when the bullets missed, the light created panic. In diaries recovered from New Guinea and Guadalcanal, officers noted how their men froze or hesitated once tracer fire began. One report lamented, "The enemy's bullets glow like spirits. The men cannot believe they are real. They stop fighting to watch the lights." American units noticed this hesitation and exploited it. During several operations in the Solomons, U.S. commanders deliberately began nighttime engagements with long belts of tracers only. A psychological bombardment before actual killing began. The jungle would glow red for minutes before any physical assault. The intent was clear: break morale before contact. There was also a moral dimension. For some American soldiers, tracers were comforting. Proof that their weapons worked, that their fire meant something in the black void. But for others, the visibility of their own killing haunted them. They could see the path of death. Unlike unseen bullets, these burned their trajectories into the mind. Pilots especially spoke of the duality. Flying a P-61 Black Widow or a B-25 over dark seas, they could see every tracer leave the gun and climb toward enemy planes. Glowing threads that connected them to destruction. It was precise, efficient, and disturbingly beautiful. In that beauty, many found something unsettling. The tracer turned war into spectacle, transforming chaos into choreography. But tactically, there was no denying its power. By mid-1944, the U.S. military doctrine integrated tracers as essential tools for night coordination, signaling, and suppression. Platoons were instructed to use them for marking targets, designating enemy positions, and signaling progress through visual bursts. Even tank gunners used tracer shells to walk fire onto moving targets. Each streak, a line of guidance through the haze of smoke and sand. Every glowing bullet was both illumination and intimidation. To the Americans, it meant accuracy. To the Japanese, it meant exposure. And as the night battles intensified across the Pacific, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, those glowing lines became more than weapons. They were the very lines between fear and control, between the unseen and the unstoppable. The tracers had changed the battlefield forever, but the Japanese command was far from passive. They studied these fire lines with obsession, searching for answers, countermeasures, and understanding. Their analysis and their growing desperation would soon follow. In Tokyo's military research circles, the appearance of American tracer fire was first dismissed as an oddity, a novelty of Western engineering. Reports from Guadalcanal described bullets that glow like lanterns, but High Command initially doubted their significance. Japan's leadership, steeped in traditional doctrines of discipline and courage, saw technology as a supplement to spirit, not a replacement for it. That perception would soon change. By early 1943, intercepted field reports painted a grim pattern. Units stationed across the Solomons, New Guinea, and the Gilberts consistently described being blinded and exposed during night engagements. Commanders noted that tracer fire had not only tactical, but psychological consequences. Even veteran troops were hesitating under its eerie glow. The Imperial Japanese Army's scientific bureaus began analyzing captured American ammunition. At the Army Technical Bureau in Sagamihara, researchers dissected tracer rounds, discovering the magnesium-based composition that burned bright red upon firing. The principle was simple enough, but replication was not. Japan lacked the industrial precision and chemical purity that made American tracers consistent. The compounds required steady access to strontium nitrate and magnesium of a specific refinement, materials that were increasingly scarce due to Allied naval blockades. What little Japan produced was prioritized for aircraft flares and incendiary bombs. By mid-1943, limited Japanese tracer ammunition entered testing. It glowed a faint green or yellow, burning inconsistently and fouling barrels. In some cases, the mixture failed to ignite at all. The project was quietly sidelined. Instead, Japanese commanders focused on adaptation. They issued new night combat directives emphasizing concealment, dispersion, and reduced muzzle flash. Infantry were ordered to avoid firing until within grenade range. Machine guns were relocated deeper into foliage or behind terrain features, shielded from tracer illumination. But these were defensive reactions, not innovations. The Americans, meanwhile, integrated tracers into every aspect of fire coordination. The technological gap widened into a tactical chasm. On the battlefield, this imbalance became painfully clear. In New Georgia, U.S. forces often used tracer fire to create deceptive patterns, raking one section of jungle to draw fire, then pivoting toward the real objective under cover of illumination. Japanese troops responded instinctively to the visible light, believing it revealed the enemy's position. But by the time they returned fire, American units had already shifted. Tracers became bait. At sea, the difference was even starker. During night naval engagements, like those off Savo Island and later in the Philippine Sea, U.S. warships used tracers to visually correct their anti-aircraft batteries. Japanese pilots diving toward carrier groups often flew directly into tracer curtains, dazzled by streaks of red and orange that blinded them in the final seconds of attack. Survivors later wrote of being overwhelmed by lines of light that moved like rivers. Japan tried to counter these effects through training. Night attack drills were intensified, and pilots were instructed to fly through tracer fire unfazed. "Trust your spirit, not your eyes," one Navy manual read. But spirit did not change physics. The tracers not only illuminated targets, but also created reference points for range estimation. Allied gunners could now adjust within seconds, a luxury Japan's unassisted marksmen never had. Behind the front lines, Japanese scientists quietly continued tracer research. A 1944 report from the Naval Air Technical Arsenal in Yokosuka described experimental rounds using barium salts and phosphorus compounds, intended to burn blue-white rather than red. The results were promising on paper, but wartime production realities made mass manufacture impossible. Even if perfected, the advantage was already lost. By 1944, the Americans were not just using tracers, they were mastering fire control systems that combined radar, gyroscopic gun sights, and illuminated ammunition. The tracer was now one part of a broader network of precision, a visible thread in an invisible web of technology that Japan could neither see nor match. Japanese commanders recognized this bitter truth. Reports sent to the Imperial General Headquarters warned that the enemy's use of visible ammunition demonstrates both confidence and abundance. It was true. To fire tracers in quantity required not only chemistry, but logistics. Millions of rounds, produced, shipped, and distributed across thousands of miles of ocean. America could afford to fire light. Japan could not. There was also a symbolic defeat embedded in those glowing arcs. The tracer's light represented something beyond weaponry. It reflected a new philosophy of war. Where Japan still revered the unseen spirit, America embraced the seen mechanism. One fought with faith in darkness, the other with mastery of light. By the time Japanese forces reached their desperate stands at Saipan and Peleliu, that difference was no longer abstract. Each red streak across the night sky was a reminder of an empire outpaced, outproduced, and outthought. The Americans had not merely invented a new kind of bullet. They had invented a new kind of warfare, one where illumination itself was an instrument of control. And soon, the most dramatic demonstrations of that control would come. In the burning skies above Guadalcanal and Saipan, where tracers didn't just trace the dark, they rewrote it. Guadalcanal, the island of fever, mud, and ghosts. For 6 relentless months, it was the place where America and Japan fought not only for territory, but for the very concept of dominance in the Pacific. It was here, under a low moon and heavy clouds in 1943, that the tracer bullet would reveal its true power. Not in laboratories or manuals, but in the raw, primal reality of war. The jungle was soaked and silent that night. American Marines of the 1st Division held their perimeter near Henderson Field, dug deep into the wet soil, rifles resting on sandbags, listening. The Japanese had been probing the lines for days, small units creeping through the brush, testing the edges of the defense, preparing for something larger. Everyone could feel it, the storm before the charge. At 1:20 hours, it began. The jungle exploded. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers surged forward, screaming, "Banzai!" a sound that tore through the darkness like a blade. The first wave crashed against the Marine lines with grenades and bayonets, shadows colliding in a chaos of shouting, splintering wood, and rifle fire. But unlike earlier nights, the Americans were not blind. From the tree line, the first bursts of red light shot outward. Glowing arcs that cut the blackness into ribbons. Tracer fire from Browning 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns ripped through the humid air, outlining the shapes of charging figures. The Marines could finally see their enemy, not in fleeting muzzle flashes, but in the steady glow of each bullet's flight. Every round was a line of purpose, every burst a command. As the tracers sliced through palm trees and grass huts, the battlefield transformed into a living inferno. The light reflected off wet leaves and helmets, turning the jungle into a surreal theater of motion. An ocean of red comets descending into green darkness. For the Japanese, the effect was devastating. They had prepared for another blind struggle, counting on stealth and darkness to mask their movements. Instead, they were met by a storm of fire that moved with intelligence, lines of light that tracked and corrected with inhuman accuracy. Survivors later described the horror. The air itself was burning. We could see the bullets chasing us. Machine. Gunners like Corporal Thomas McNulty of the 164th Infantry Regiment recalled how they used tracers to walk fire across enemy ranks, a technique impossible before. "We could paint the night," he said. "Once you found them, you didn't lose them again." From command posts, the scene resembled hell itself. Officers watching through field glasses saw the entire perimeter glowing, every sector lit by the rhythm of red light. Radio operators coordinated reinforcements by watching the direction of tracer fire, a living signal system written across the sky. For the Japanese command, the shock was twofold. They had underestimated the psychological weight of illumination. The glowing rounds not only destroyed their night tactics, but shattered their spiritual advantage. The belief that darkness was their ally. Every tracer was a reminder that the Americans were fighting with a new kind of certainty, an industrial precision that no amount of bravery could overcome. Within hours, the battlefield was littered with bodies, scorched foliage, and fragments of helmets gleaming under the glow of dying embers. The once invincible Japanese night assault doctrine, perfected in China and early Pacific campaigns, lay broken under the weight of chemistry and innovation. And yet, for all the American triumph, there was something haunting in the spectacle. Photographers who later arrived described the remnants: trees shredded by bullets, branches burned at odd angles, and strange streaks of phosphorus residue glowing faintly along the ground. It was as if light itself had scorched the jungle. In the debrief that followed, U.S. officers noted not only the tactical success, but the emotional one. Troops reported higher confidence during night engagements, less fear, and greater accuracy. The tracers had done more than guide bullets. They had guided morale. For the Japanese survivors, it was a revelation none would forget. Diaries found after the battle carried lines of disbelief. "We saw their bullets burn. The light followed us like eyes. There is no escape in the night." That night on Guadalcanal became a lesson, one that would echo through every island that followed. The Americans had learned to control not only territory, but perception. They could now decide what could be seen and what could not. The tracer had given them command over one of the most powerful elements in warfare, visibility, and as that light continued to spread across the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to the Marianas, it would become a symbol of the industrial momentum now in motion. Japan's soldiers had faced the fire in the dark. Soon, their skies themselves would burn with it. By the summer of 1944, the Pacific had become a machine. Vast, relentless, and unstoppable. From the decks of U.S. carriers to the island airstrips carved from coral, war was now an orchestra of engines, logistics, and precision. And hovering above it all was the light, the tracer, guiding every shot, every decision, every heartbeat of battle. Saipan was no jungle skirmish. It was a fortress. Japanese soldiers called it the Steel Island, because its cliffs, caves, and bunkers were woven together by discipline and desperation. The Americans called it something else: the doorstep to Japan itself. Whoever controlled Saipan controlled the reach of the B-29 superfortress. And so, on June 15, 1944, the sky itself caught fire. At dawn, the invasion began. Waves of LVTs and Higgins boats crawled toward the beach under heavy shell fire. The sea churned with oil and blood. American destroyers pounded the coast with relentless 5-inch guns, their shells tracing luminous arcs across the horizon. Each detonation on land sent geysers of earth into the air, illuminated by the streaking red lines of tracer rounds from ship-mounted .50 caliber guns. From the command ships offshore, it looked like an artist's nightmare. Red veins pulsing through smoke and salt mist, reaching toward a coastline of flame. But the true spectacle came hours later. When night fell over Saipan, the Japanese launched their counterattack not from land, but from the air. Dozens of Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters swept down from the dark, their engines screaming. The first U.S. radar blips appeared like ghosts, moments before the real thing came into view, streaks of silver wings diving through the black. Anti-aircraft batteries roared to life. From every ship, every hillside, every field gun emplacement, thousands of tracers tore into the sky. It was a sight no camera could ever truly capture. The horizon was gone, replaced by a dome of light. Red, green, and white tracers crisscrossed the heavens, spiraling upward in deadly geometry. To those below, it looked as if the stars themselves were falling, burning trails toward the sea. For the gunners, it was both beauty and madness. Each round glowed for only a second, but together they painted the air in constant motion, weaving a living web of defense. "It felt like we could touch the light," one Navy crewman later recalled. "You could see the path of your courage." Pilots inside the storm saw something far different. Tracer rounds passed by in blinding flashes, streaking across cockpits, tearing through wings. The illusion of invincibility, so central to the Zero's legend, vanished. One Japanese pilot described the scene in his diary before disappearing into the ocean. "The sky is alive with red fire. It follows the machine wherever it goes. There is no darkness now." The Americans below could finally see their invisible enemy, not as shapes, but as moving targets caught in the glow. Radar guided the aim, but the tracers confirmed the kill. Every streak of light that found its mark ended with a bloom of fire, the fall of another plane into the black water below. For the men on the beach, it was a show that defied belief. Soldiers took cover among wreckage and sandbags, looking up at a sky that seemed to be unraveling. One Marine said later, "It wasn't war anymore. It was light fighting light." By midnight, Saipan's skies were littered with burning wrecks, the ocean reflecting orange flames like molten glass. The air still shimmered with afterglow, the faint arcs of phosphorus hanging where bullets had passed moments before. But amid that beauty lay something darker, something prophetic. Because for all the control the tracers gave, they also revealed a new truth. War was no longer about courage or even skill. It was about visibility. Whoever could control light could control life. The Americans had mastered that control. The Japanese, for all their spirit, had not. When dawn broke, the beaches of Saipan were covered with debris and silence. Thousands of Japanese soldiers had died in the failed counterattack. The few survivors staggered from their caves, blinded and stunned. Some clutched burned rifles, the metal still warm from the previous night's firestorm. And above them, the American flag rose over Mount Tapachao. The tracers had guided the guns, but also the story, the path from jungle chaos to calculated domination. In that light, the Pacific War began to shift irreversibly. Soon, the lessons of Guadalcanal and Saipan would merge into something larger. Tracers would not just light up night battles, they would guide bombing runs, naval gunnery, even the terrifying precision of the atomic age soon to come. The soldiers on Saipan didn't know it yet, but that night, under burning skies, the world had crossed a line. The tracer, once a small invention of chemistry, had become the language of modern warfare. By the time the sun rose over Tokyo on March 9, 1945, the city had no idea that within 12 hours it would no longer exist. That evening, the sky above Japan's capital became a vast, moving constellation of aircraft, 334 American B-29 superfortresses, flying in tight formation, engines droning in perfect mechanical rhythm. From their bomb bays hung not explosives, but something far deadlier. Fire. Operation Meetinghouse, the largest single air raid of World War II, and the first full-scale test of America's new doctrine, total destruction through precision and illumination. The tracers came first. As the lead bombers descended to 5,000 feet, the gunners began to open fire. Long red streaks cut through the dark sky, not to hit enemies, but to mark paths, guiding waves of bombers behind them, helping them find formation in the night. Each tracer round traced a flight path like a glowing signature across the heavens. Below, Tokyo slept. The city was built mostly of wood and paper. Centuries of tradition compacted into tight neighborhoods of tatami houses, narrow streets, and open markets. The Japanese command believed it was too vast, too spread out to be burned completely. They were wrong. At 12:08 a.m., the first bombs fell. M69 incendiaries, each containing jellied gasoline that burst into 1,500-degree fireballs on impact. In seconds, whole districts lit up. In minutes, Tokyo became a furnace. The tracers that once guided soldiers now guided apocalypse. From above, the B-29 gunners saw it all. The city glowing red and orange like molten metal, lines of tracer rounds streaking between gunships and Japanese interceptors. The Americans had learned something terrible and powerful since Saipan: how to choreograph destruction with light. Each plane's gunners used tracers not to aim blindly into darkness, but to form invisible lanes. Columns of fire that mapped the sky. Behind them, other bombers followed these glowing trails, diving in perfect precision through turbulence and flame. To the Japanese below, it was something beyond comprehension. The night sky pulsed with red threads, bullets, flames, and sparks, weaving together into a canopy of light. Thousands of people poured into the Sumida River, seeking escape, but the water itself boiled from the heat. Bullets that glowed red like fireflies, one survivor remembered. The sky was alive. It moved. It burned. By 2:30 a.m., the firestorm had consumed 16 square miles of Tokyo. Flames rose higher than the B-29s themselves. Winds of over 100 miles per hour roared through the streets, a tornado of fire that tore buildings apart and carried burning debris into the air. Inside their bombers, American crews watched with silent awe. The glow from below was so bright, it lit the cockpits from beneath. The men's faces illuminated not by moonlight, but by the reflection of a dying city. Tracers still darted upward, streams of desperate anti-aircraft fire from Japan's remaining defenses. But they looked small now, weak against the vast sheet of light rising from the earth. The commander of the raid, General Curtis LeMay, later described it in chilling simplicity. There was no need for aiming anymore. The whole city was the target. By dawn, the light began to fade, not because the fire had stopped, but because there was nothing left to burn. Tokyo had been erased. Over 100,000 people were dead. More than Hiroshima, more than Nagasaki. 1 million left homeless. Entire wards reduced to glowing ash. When the last B-29 turned back toward the Pacific, the crew could still see the glow from 150 miles away, a red aura lingering above the horizon. In that moment, the tracer's journey had reached its most terrifying evolution. What began as a simple bullet that glowed in the dark had become the backbone of a doctrine that fused technology, visibility, and annihilation, from jungle skirmishes to naval battles, and now to burning cities. The same red streaks had connected every stage of the war's descent into total warfare. The Japanese commanders on the ground were left speechless. Their own anti-aircraft guns had used tracers too, but it no longer mattered. Their light was swallowed by the greater fire. Their bullets vanished into the inferno they could not control. One officer, writing in his final report before his unit was obliterated, noted, "The enemy's bullets trace the sky. Ours vanish. It is as if heaven itself chooses their path." Operation Meetinghouse ended with the sound of silence. No planes, no sirens, only the crackle of embers across what had once been a capital city. It was the ultimate lesson of modern war. Light could no longer guide just soldiers. It could guide extinction. The tracers had done their work, not just marking targets, but showing mankind what it was now capable of. And yet, this was not the end. Because in the weeks that followed, those same glowing bullets would appear again, not over Tokyo, but over Okinawa, where the final storm of the Pacific would test both nations' will to the breaking point. April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday. The island of Okinawa lay under a pale dawn, calm and still. But beneath that quiet, hundreds of thousands of men were already preparing to unleash the last great battle of the Pacific War. For the Americans, this was the final step before Japan itself. the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific Campaign, involving more than 1,500 ships and 500,000 troops. For the Japanese, it was the endgame. A fight to the death. Waged on home soil, Okinawa would become a graveyard lit by tracers. As the U.S. Navy surrounded the island, Japanese aircraft, many of them kamikazes, hurled themselves at the fleet in waves. Each attack brought chaos and light. American ships filled the sky with red, green, and white tracers, their guns firing in a ceaseless rhythm. To the men aboard the ships, it felt like the end of the world. Each kamikaze appeared first as a shadow, then as a glowing shape illuminated by hundreds of tracer rounds. The air shimmered with burning streaks, as if the sea itself were spitting light back into the heavens. At night, the ocean horizon looked alive, dotted with the flashes of gunfire, explosions, and glowing trajectories. Destroyers burned, fighters fell in spirals of flame. The sound of anti-aircraft guns merged with the scream of diving planes into a single deafening roar. But even amid the destruction, the tracers' role remained absolute. It was the only thing keeping chaos from collapsing entirely. In the blinding storm, tracers became navigation, guiding pilots, marking targets, creating invisible maps in a sky without order. Marine and Army units on land used them too. Machine gunners marked cave entrances and ridge lines with glowing paths so that artillery teams could follow. Mortar crews watched for the flicker of tracer fire to adjust their aim. Snipers hunted muzzle flashes, counting the rhythm of red dots that danced through smoke and dust. For both sides, the tracers were lifelines and death sentences. Japanese defenders hiding in caves often used captured American ammunition, their guns spitting out red light that betrayed their positions instantly. Within seconds, return fire rained down. Shells guided not by radar, but by sight, by color, by light. One Marine sergeant described the surreal beauty of it all. At night, the whole ridge was covered in fireflies. Except those fireflies killed people. Okinawa was supposed to last a few weeks. It dragged on for nearly 3 months. By June 22, 1945, when organized resistance finally ended, over 12,000 Americans were dead, 36,000 wounded, and more than 100,000 Japanese soldiers had been killed. Tens of thousands of civilians were gone, many driven to suicide by propaganda and fear. And through it all, the tracers never stopped glowing. Each night, survivors described the same haunting sight. Long red arcs floating above burning hills, fading slowly into the humid dark. They were reminders of where the fire had been, of what it had taken. But for the commanders watching from offshore, those arcs meant something else. They marked the transition, the end of one kind of war, and the beginning of another. Because once Okinawa fell, Japan itself lay open. The airfields there could now launch the next phase, the one that would render even tracers obsolete. Okinawa's light was fading, but the world's brightest flash was coming, one that would end the war and redefine warfare forever. That flash would not come from a bullet. It would come from the sky. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. The morning was warm, clear, and calm. Streetcars clattered down narrow roads. Children walked to school in bright uniforms, and soldiers on bicycles passed rice paddies glistening in the sun. The air carried no warning, no sirens, no searchlights, no tracers. But above the city, at 31,000 feet, a single B-29 superfortress named Enola Gay drifted in silence. Its bomb bay held a weapon so powerful that even the crew did not fully understand it. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened, and in the space of a heartbeat, the world changed forever. The flash that followed was not a streak of light. It was all light. A silent white sun bloomed over Hiroshima, vaporizing steel, stone, and human bodies in an instant. Temperatures reached 4,000 degrees Celsius. Shadows burned themselves into walls. People simply vanished. No tracers, no gunfire, no battle lines. Just light, absolute, inescapable, final. From the ground, survivors saw the sky turn white, then orange, then black. A shock wave ripped through the city, flattening everything within miles. Those who lived described it as a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. The power that had once guided bullets was now guiding destiny itself. In the command rooms back in Tinian, generals stared at the reports coming in. They had unleashed a new kind of light, one that made even the brightest tracer seem like a spark against the sun. For decades, warfare had evolved around visibility. Who could see? Who could aim? Who could illuminate the enemy first? Now seeing no longer mattered. The new light erased the difference between soldier and civilian, combatant and bystander. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. Another bomb, another flash, another city gone. When Emperor Hirohito finally addressed his nation, his voice trembling over radio static, he said only that Japan must endure the unendurable, because nothing could endure that light. In those moments, the tracer's purpose, its journey through the war, had reached its symbolic end. From the jungles of Guadalcanal to the skies over Tokyo, it had served as the thread connecting human eyes to mechanical destruction. It had turned darkness into direction, chaos into control. But Hiroshima marked the point where control became meaningless. There was no need to trace bullets anymore. The war had found its final illumination, one that consumed everything in its path. When the mushroom cloud cleared and silence returned, only fragments of light remained. The dull glow of fires still burning in the ruins, the faint shimmer of heat rising from shattered steel. And yet, even here, amid the ash, the tracer's legacy lingered. In the laboratories that built the bomb, scientists spoke of trajectories, of guidance, of visibility. The same language used by gunners years before. The principles of tracing had evolved from ballistics to physics, from the battlefield to the atom. It was as if humanity had taken the idea of the tracer, the power to light a path through darkness, and magnified it until it consumed the world itself. When Huoseoi's Allied forces entered Hiroshima weeks later, they found a city without shadows, everything evenly scorched, as though light itself had flattened it. One reporter wrote, "It was as if night and day had collided, and both had died." And so, in a sense, the tracer's story ended where it began, with light, guiding destruction through darkness, but this time there would be no path back. The guns were silent now. The tracers had stopped burning, but their glow remained, not in the sky, but in the memory of every soldier, every pilot, every civilian who had watched war turn the night into fire. That glow would follow humanity into its next age, an age where light would again become weapon, guide, and warning. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world entered a strange kind of twilight. Not darkness, but the afterglow of everything it had seen. The tracer's light still lingered, not in the air, but in memory. Those streaks that once cut across jungles, oceans, and cities had become symbols of precision, of power, of the terrifying clarity that war had given mankind. Because that was what the tracer truly was, a line between knowing and unknowing. Before it, men fought in shadows. After it, they fought illuminated by their own destruction. Every round of light was both a guide and a confession. Proof that human hands had learned to turn vision itself into a weapon. Soldiers remembered them not for their beauty, but for what they revealed. In the thick of battle, they were lifelines, showing who was shooting, who was still alive. But from a distance, they became something else entirely. To the pilots above Tokyo, the tracers looked like veins of red fire running through the world. To those beneath, they looked like the end of time. And yet, beyond their horror, there was something hauntingly human in them, the need to see, even in darkness, to make sense of chaos through light, to aim, even when surrounded by fear. That desire would not end with the war. It would carry on, into radar, into missiles, into satellites tracing the heavens. The same principle, the same impulse, to illuminate, to target, to control. But the lesson buried within those burning trails is not about victory. It is about the cost of sight, what humanity loses each time it turns light into a weapon. The tracers of World War II were supposed to help men see better. Instead, they revealed too much. They showed us the full, unflinching shape of modern war, its beauty, its precision, its absolute inhumanity. And though the bullets stopped flying long ago, the glow they left behind still lingers, faint, eternal, and impossible to forget. Because in every age since, whenever the night of war returns, the sky still remembers how to burn,